What's up everybody, hope you're doing well. Sorry for the delay in my release schedule. April has been really hectic and around half the script had to go through rewrites and re-recordings after I figured some of my initial thoughts weren't that accurate. Unfortunately, that was all finished before the new Gaining Grounds dropped, so be mindful this video is still made in the context of Gaining Grounds 1. As always, if you're new to the channel, you should watch the explanation of my rating system linked in the video description, and anything stated in this video is ultimately my own opinion. I really appreciate all your ideas and feedback, so if you've been enjoying my content, please subscribe, comment, like the video, and look forward to video reviews of all the new Malifaux changes within the next week or two. But first, let's dig right into Apex. Playstyle Prediction. Just as their name implies, Apex are at the top of the food chain and live to trophy hunt, rewarding themselves each time Cooper claims a scalp. Their hand functions like a firearm magazine, getting a full reload if the prey they hunt manage to escape, and making any severe card potentially Cooper's next silver bullet. Using their predatory instincts for accuracy and lethality, the hunters easily place amongst the most dangerous marksmen in the game. Whereas those hunters are more straightforward, Cooper's pets and possessions provide movement manipulation, scoring potential, and the ability to dive past enemy lines. Artemis, Model 9, and the Malifaux each have unique tools to move past enemies, and Allure tags in to consistently complete objectives. Both Bloodhounds are also trained to deny objectives, bringing powerful ski marker removal, protection for friendly models, and movement effects. Although the Crypsis, Harpooner, and Vigati bring ranged firepower and area lockdown with their overwatch, pushes, and traps, Cooper is already deadly at range, and these marksmen struggle with mobility. Therefore, I predict hiring more than one hunter minion is a beginner's trap that will lose you the game, as fast enemies can easily jump and dodge around their zone control. Rather, Cooper likes to have his fill of the most dangerous game first by eliminating the enemy's most mobile members. Only then can the rest entertain him, forcing wounded stragglers to run through live gunfire, climb through pit traps, and chase reeled-in markers like bait. After all, it's only natural for an apex predator to love toying with his prey. Keyword features: Predatory Instinct and Flip bonuses. In order to understand Predatory Instinct, we need to review the landscape of plus and minus flips for ranged attacks. The key benchmark on any flip is obviously straight. On duels, negative flips are unlikely to hit and can be out-cheated with certainty, and on damage, negative flips have a low likelihood to result in more than weak damage. The more spiked or scaling your damage track is, like Cooper's 357 rather than a 234, the more important it is to get a straight flip on damage and maximize your shots. Plus flips are nice, especially on damage, but not as important as the improvement from negative to straight. For attacks, I assume a single negative flip on damage as a baseline. If I luck out or manage my card advantage for a better result, that's great, but we're working with on-paper theory, so let's keep it simple. The general shooting penalties are concealment and friendly fire on duels, and cover on damage flips. Other duel penalties come from abilities like Manipulative or Serene Countenance, and other damage penalties come from a tied duel or abilities like Hard to Wound. Note Cooper ignores cover, Crypsis Core ignore both cover and friendly fire, and both Hounds as well as Model 9 have effects which allow friendly fire to be ignored. Usually a model's only option to overcome these negatives is to use a Focused, which will cancel up to one negative on both the duel and the damage flip. Just that one positive to the damage flip will typically threaten severe, but this doesn't apply when the opponent benefits from cover or Hard to Wound. Furthermore, an enemy with two sources of negatives on duels is practically unhittable by most models in the game, which is why I often stress that good shooting models need to ignore or cancel out at least one of these common penalties. Any Apex model can do so using the crew's multiple sources of adversary, making all the shooting models in the crew already minimally viable. With that out of the way, we can finally talk about Predatory Instinct. Every Apex model except Runaways can once per activation trade a plus on one side for a minus to the other in either direction. For the duration of this review, I'll be referring to which side of the attack gets the plus flip, so when I say Predatory Instinct on the duel, it means plus to duel and minus to damage, and when I say Predatory Instinct on damage, it means the opposite. It's easy to piece together why this ability is strong. First, it allows the user to straight flip a duel against a single penalty without needing Focused or Adversary. The attack will almost certainly hit for weak damage, but if you have min damage 3 or a good trigger, that's probably worth it. If you don't suffer from a penalty, it makes it possible to cycle a weak card out of your deck by not choosing it, and makes it more likely to win the duel on the flip, meaning your opponent is pressured to cheat first. Second, it allows the user to still threaten severe damage against hard-to-wound models if combined with a Focused. Very few models in the game can do this. And third, it allows the user to turn any positive flip to the duel into a positive on damage instead, a feature especially important for Cooper, who can't benefit from Focused on his reload attack. There are some niche interactions to note about Predatory Instinct as well. It can be used once per activation, making out-of-activation attacks particularly dangerous. Cripps' Strike Lines, Ulur's Hold Down trigger, and Mr. Nataro's Obey are the best sources of these. It can also be used on disengage attacks, either on the duel for a more likely -2 inches, or on damage if you benefit from adversary or additional engaging models. Area Control. Apex will not survive long if engaged prematurely. They really need to do some damage to the enemy first before they hit melee combat. One option to avoid this is riddling the board with no-go zones that prevent freedom of movement. Cripps can lay down an Overwatch line that lets him shoot for free if crossed, and Vagati can lay up to 2 pit trap markers per turn, arguably the best hazardous markers in the game. Apex comes with options to push enemies into these zones as well: the Malifaux Rex, Artemis, Harpooners, and less so Ulur, as well as some out-of-keyword picks. This tactic will simply fail on boards without good choke points or vantage points, and also against crews which can ignore or avoid these effects with incorporeal, flying, or leap, so plan accordingly. To close it out, we have 2 more keyword features, quick ones this time. The first is the Malifaux aura. The Malifaux Rex affects all friendly Apex with his Wild Hunt aura, granting them crows against any enemy engaged by him. Just keep this in mind as we review each model, and note which trigger can be free if properly set up. The second is Scheming and Scheme Removal. Both Artemis and Ulur have a pulse which removes scheme markers as their bonus actions, and unrivaled mobility as a pair. Alongside Cooper dropping scheme markers on kills, they make Apex a strong choice for both scoring and preventing scheme marker based schemes. Master and Totem. Lord Cooper, 15 cost Master. Cooper is a one-shotting monster, being one of a very few in Malifaux who can hit above 6 severe, especially at range, and even more especially ignoring cover. The built-in mask drops a scheme marker on kills, crows give adversary, and tomes are a great hand refill, which are all useful in various ways. The ram trigger stands out though, preventing both hard to kill and demise from keeping models alive. This is incredibly important for killing Serena Bowman and Midnight Stalker in particular. Cooper gets up to 2 shots a turn, one normal one and one from reload that can't use Focused. He usually wants to shoot with a Focused, concentrate if he needs to, and then reload using Predatory Instinct on damage, which requires adversary or a soulstone on the duel. This line also requires starting Cooper's activation with at least 1 Focused. As for adversary, the easiest source is the most dangerous game, which just lets Cooper apply it to any enemy at the start of each turn with no requirements. The obvious choice is whoever Cooper wants to kill, but it'll often be more advantageous to place it elsewhere, like models near a gang of runaways, models who want to disengage, or models in the backline threatened by Apex's more mobile options. If Cooper can't reload, he has foul-mouthed motivation, which is never useless and has a strong movement trigger on masks. He can use this to remove friendly fire or just to move the crew along, either is good. Speaking of movement, and despite Master AP being so valuable, Cooper doesn't mind walking if it means line of sight, even with 5 move and no movement tech. There may even be times where Cooper triple walks just to get that crucial reload shot, something I'm sure opponents won't see coming. If he doesn't have to walk, he'll throw Explosive Ordnance, a decent Shockwave 2 that applies Injured for effective stat 7, or breaks up engagements with the mask trigger. Note here that Apex may ignore the effects, so if the enemy passes or you need to push someone, you can still hit your own models. He can also charge with that spare AP, his melee attack isn't worthless. Removing terrain markers can be a good tool in some matchups, it's got decent severe 5, and it's actually quite good with the Malifaux aura. Once Cooper is engaged though, he has 0 way to get out due to eyes on the prize, so make sure he can kill or get out another way. Engaging Cooper is one of the best ways to shut him down, so activate Cooper as soon as he gets a chance, or have multiple ways of getting him out. Do not let Cooper get staggered for exactly this reason, or have condition removal ready. It's easier to move Cooper out of combat than the enemy. Finally, Cooper is solid defensively. His health pool is on the lower end, but defense 6 and armor 1 keep him healthy. Willpower 5 leaves him open to conditions, but with Laugh Off he won't get moved into danger or off of objectives. Overall, despite Cooper seeming like point and shoot, he's not that one-dimensional. He brings nuanced tools like dropping schemes on kills, demise ignoring, laugh off, removing terrain markers, and Apex's only healing, giving him options to score and deny various objectives. Still, for the most part his job is to nail 7 damage headshots on enemies, especially if given the opportunity to one-shot schemers. Runaway. 1-cost minion Totem. Lord Cooper is always found hunting 3 insignificant runaways. They start on the center line rather than in your deployment zone, but they still follow normal deployment timing, unlike models with From the Shadows. They only have 4 health with 4/4 stats, putting them in grave danger to moderate 4 damage tracks, but they can survive any week and want to die anyway. Or rather, they don't, but Cooper wants them to. Their attacks are basic, but free attacks are free attacks, and with Adversary, a pack of runaways can do some decent damage. The trigger may be intended for getting them killed, but Cooper can place Adversary on anyone, so that's pretty niche. I like to think of it as a surge trigger against enemies with awful or non-existent melee. Their bonus action is a strong throwaway attack when targeting models that aren't going to use Focused, at least when out of Cooper's line of sight or range. This is the best way to kill runaways with Cooper, since you don't want to use Cooper's actual activation to shoot your own models. Runaways can't relent or cheat against those shots, but Cooper can Predatory Instinct whichever way lets him flip more cards, and cheat the duel or the damage. If Cooper does kill, he drops a scheme marker and refunds a soul stone, which is an easy way to drop markers within 4 inches of one another, and the first of 3 possible fates for the runaways. The second is that they can be killed by an enemy, obviously, which gives the killer a semi-permanent adversary based on Cooper's line of sight. This can be one of the best sources of adversary against large enemies in particular. The Flush with Cash aura can also generate stones from these deaths, doubling up on the catch-22 for the opponent. Lastly, runaways can escape to refill your hand and drop a scheme marker anywhere on the table. Escaping on turn 2 or 3 may not be an option on the diagonal deployments, but on the straight deployments is easy to hug the board edge. I prefer the opponent dedicates a model to stop them, but if not, then I can cheat or discard aggressively and draw back to a full hand. They can run in a pack of 3 to fight any hunters, or they can split up to draw attention in both directions. In times where it isn't possible to escape, they can act as roadblocks, and whoever isn't killed in mid-game can escape for a late-game power swing. All in all, the runaways look to be a powerful and flexible totem. I'm excited to hear ideas on the best way to use them. Remember that nothing stops them from protecting objectives, or even running back towards Cooper, to beg for mercy I assume. 0-inch engagement ranges aren't great, but 2 30mm models can body block a 30mm marker if it's against a wall. Keyword choices. Model 9. 9-cost henchman. Model 9 is a mobile tank who can't be pinned down by almost any means. His primary feature is his agility despite being move 5. Mobile Warrior ensures he's never restricted by engagement, Run and Gun gives him a free move when he shoots, the Burst of Speed trigger on his bonus action is a free move and lets him move through models alongside Blade Rush, and Throw Knife has a built-in on your heals effect if you hit severe damage. The combination of these effects means Model 9 will be where he wants, when he wants, or dead. Not that killing him is easy though. Defense 6 and Armor 2 with no willpower weakness make him a damage-soaking machine, despite having 2 less health than cost. Most importantly, Model 9 can eliminate almost every natural counter to Armor 2 by avoiding anti-armor threats or using soul stones. If the opponent gets a straight flip, he can make it negative, and if they get lucky, he can just reduce the damage. Just like how healing an Armor 2 model is worth much more than healing a non-armored one, every point of damage Model 9 saves with a Soul Stone is extremely valuable. Offensively, Model 9 starts with a solid 2-4-5 melee attack with the potential execute, especially dangerous when using the Malifaux aura. Reposition seems redundant when Model 9 already has Mobile Warrior and Burst of Speed, but could make a difference when having to move around corners or into range of a new target. Thrown Knife notably comes at stat 7 and is either a throwaway attack that hopes to get lucky for moderate 3, or a mobility option of stacking damage buffs to hit severe. Avalanche of Blades is a phenomenal trigger, generating anything from a do-over if you miss, to a melee attack if Model 9 places. The plus to duel can just as well be a plus to damage if Predatory Instinct hasn't been used already, which is huge for these spiked damage tracks. Lastly for offense is Blade Rush and Burst of Speed. Unavoidable damage is always strong, and in particular makes Model 9 perfectly kitted to finish off Armor 2 or hard to kill enemies. That transitions us into the bonus action, which does actually have an effect other than burst of speed. It requires activating, and Apex can overcome friendly fire in other ways, so it's only necessary in niche cases. I see this effect as a free card if you're going for a kill either way, maybe more against Plague or Big Hat. Practically though, treat this action like a leap with no built-in mask, or free injured if you flip a crow. Final verdict? In keyword, 2 stars. I'll insert out of keyword 1 star here immediately since he works the same just without Apex synergy. So here's the thing. Originally I recorded a rant about how Model 9 isn't actually a 9-cost model because he requires so many stones, how he doesn't ignore terrain when moving, which makes him much slower than expected, how he requires focused and good cards, which take those away from Cooper, and how B-Bay and Calypso just make a better Armor 2 tank. But then I thought about it, and then I played a game, something I haven't had time to do for a while, and basically I was totally wrong. In keyword, 4 stars. Out of keyword, 3 stars. My criticisms weren't untrue, but despite them, Model 9 is stupid strong in things like Symbols of Authority, Breakthrough, and basically any other time you want to be behind enemy lines. On turn 1 he moves up and concentrates, and then on turn 2 he charges, shoots at stat 7, teleports behind the enemy without fail, pushes away with burst of speed, and is now deep in the opponent's backline with an action remaining. And at that point, what does the opponent do? Does he send someone to catch him? That leaves the enemy model away from the rest of the conflict and won't be enough. Does he send a small army? Your crew now easily controls the center, and Model 9 can still escape. He's just that good and mobile. You can't stop him from interacting because he charges out of combat. You probably can't kill him because he has Armor 2 and stones. And so the only potential option would be to out-activate him and then remove his ski markers with a model that he can't kill. So good luck with that. Out of keyword, he does much the same thing, but he doesn't get Allure unless you take the pair for 17 stones, which is actually a pretty good package. Model 9 will dive in like he usually does, and Allure can protect your master until the Intrepid Effigy becomes the Intrepid Emissary, so you could almost consider that you save 4 stones on the Emissary that way. You may want to consider why you didn't declare Apex in the first place if Model 9 and Allure are so powerful in the scheme pool, but maybe that sometimes happens. Malifaux Rex, 10 cost Enforcer. The Malifaux is a terrifying behemoth that charges over the enemy frontline and begins thrashing everyone. First and foremost is Wild Hunt, which needs to be activated and grants crows to attacking Apex allies for a variety of effects. For the Malifaux himself, this grants built-in Rampage on his melee attack, pushing him 5 inches and maybe dealing some damage. Rampage is a little awkward in that it moves exactly 5 inches, so how you position the initial charge may affect who he can reach after the push. He also ignores Severe, Hazardous, and models when moving, and has Rush, so he's often going to use the sequence of Wild Hunt, Charge, Attack, Rampage to move up 12 inches. His massive Jaws is a standard 3-4-5 with a 2-inch engagement, and in addition to Rampage can trigger Heal 2 on rams. Ruthless is good for a Willpower 4 model, and it's a good attack overall, but completely underwhelming for 10 cost. Malifaux's power actually comes from Tail Whip. Usually after Rampaging, Tail Whip 2-inch pulses for damage, staggered, and a small push, and then uses the built-in trigger. This makes the Malifaux unmovable and gives him a 3-inch engagement range, leaving most enemies unable to strike back and possibly staggered. But that's actually not the extent of it. Because Predatory Instinct can be used on any attack, the Malifaux will likely hit weak on disengage attempts more often than this. Combined with Staggered, that reduces nearly all models' disengage push to less than 2 inches. So take for instance move 4 beaters with 2-inch engagement ranges. If staggered and pushed to 3 inches away, they're now engaged, unable to strike back, and probably have a 0-inch disengage. Models with higher move stats and worse attacks can instead be pushed into base contact with Malifaux, and will now likely fail to escape 3 inches in a single disengage push. This isn't perfect, it doesn't work against models with leap-like actions, but it does prevent anyone from helping due to staggered and Malifaux being unmovable. It also prevents effects like Glimpse the Void from neutering one of your biggest threats, which is nice to have against certain crews. Even if surrounded, Malifaux can take most incoming attacks well enough. 4/4 stats leave him easily hit, but terrifying 12 and 12 hard to wound health means he can absorb or avoid a lot of punishment, particularly if he's out engaging or if enemies are cheating tail whips rather than terrifying. To close out his kit, an accurate bonus action push is ideal in any situation, especially for Apex, for obvious reasons. It's important to consider that there are some downsides to Malifaux. He doesn't allow allies to ignore friendly fire, he's not effective against skirmish crews or ones with leap effects, or at least less effective. He folds somewhat to minimum 3 attacks that don't mind terrifying, and probably worst, he gets completely shafted by obey effects that can make him territorial trigger top of turn. The Flush with Cash upgrade can dodge 2 of those problems, but now the Malifaux will cost 12 and effectively 2 more every time he needs to dodge an attack with bribery. At least you can get a perfect vehicle to carry Flush with Cash over to the runaways, so maybe that's a few stones refunded. Final verdict? In keyword, 5 stars. Malifaux is expensive, but he's pretty amazing. He can definitely flop in some matchups, and Model 9 serves a similar scheming purpose for Allure. So Malifaux isn't strictly an auto take. I think he wins out against Model 9 more often due to his disruption and crow aura, but it really depends on the matchup. Out of keyword, 2 stars. Malifaux could be used as an unexpected pick against crews that can't deal with his kit. This can be due to low willpower, no minimum 3, no leap effects, and so on. He even gives staggered and targets move to synergize with several other explorers' keywords. I don't think it'll be seen often, except if he's taken as a vehicle for Allure. That pair costs 18 stones, or 20 if you also take Flush with Cash, which is extremely expensive, and I think Model 9 is better out of keyword for scenarios where Allure is your primary scoring threat. Artemis, 6 cost Enforcer. Artemis is the first of Cooper's hounds, geared towards tracking, herding, and support. His first potential role is scheming and anti-scheming, using his 6 unimpeded move, nimble, and nose to the ground. He can easily drop and remove markers 12 inches away from where he activates, and can drop 2 schemes in a single turn with the typical drop, walk, drop activation. If he wants to drop schemes within 4 inches of one another, he can crow trigger on his melee or bonus action, although the latter requires stringent positioning to not remove the already existing marker. Tear Apart is very average on damage, but comes at stat 6 with 3 separately suited triggers for more damage, a scheme, or free movement. It may not seem like much at first, but with an 18-inch unimpeded threat range, predatory instinct, focused, and up to 6 severe damage, this attack can hit surprisingly hard both where and when the opponent isn't expecting it. The follow-up by Allure, which we'll get to later, makes it even more dangerous. Unfortunately, Artemis has average defensive stats and 6 wounds, putting him on the dangerous edge of getting one-shot by models with 6 severe. He'll have to use terrain, line of sight, and range to stay alive. While hanging back, Artemis has Intimidating Roar to keep enemies away or move non-minion allies, and uses Nimble to position angles. Pushing up Cooper twice on bottom of turn 1 could enable a strong alpha strike with little room for the opponent to respond. Both triggers on the attack are powerful too. On Your Heels pushes before placing for up to 15 inches of movement, followed by an attack or disengage to play schemes. While the Crow trigger is free with the Malifaux aura and will usually give a small push and focus to an Apex ally, which is fantastic. Final verdict, in keyword, 5 stars. Artemis may be squishy, but he's relatively cheap and highly impactful in keyword. His speed, scheme marker influence, and movement support supplements Apex very well. On his own, Artemis may only be a 3 or 4 star model used primarily in scheme marker heavy pools. It's actually the other Bloodhound which bumps this rating up to 5 stars. Allure granting effective hard to wound removes most one-shot threats, and Artemis is the best by your side platform in Apex, making the 12 cost tag team one of Malifaux's greatest threats for scheming or assassinating squishy enemies. Out of keyword, 1 star. With the quality of unimpeded, scheming, and intimidating roar available among the best Explorers minions, Artemis is just too squishy to make an impression. Allure, 6 cost Enforcer. Allure is the brawling hound, trained to protect Cooper and cut down fleeing prey. His 6 defense, 7 health, warning growl, and built-in healing make him very sturdy for his cost. The willpower 4 is low, but his mobility and bulk should be enough to keep him alive. Warning growl might be one of the best abilities in the game. It applies to himself and friendly models for free, it prevents one-shots, it avoids things that ignore hard to wound, it's the perfect ability for protecting Lord Cooper, and it only requires being near the defending ally, not the attacking enemy. The 2-inch range is short though, so it's unlikely you can apply this to more than 2 friendly models at a time. Ulur's most important feature is by your side. He can teleport next to Cooper, Model 9, the Malifaux, or Artemis, making him available basically anywhere he's needed. He can slingshot off Artemis or Model 9 to play schemes, suddenly appear to save Cooper from engagement, supply damage to finish off a specific enemy, or a bunch of other niche things. Ulur's bonus actions are both tailor-made to synergize with it too. I've Got Your Back can save friendly models he teleports to or near and immediately apply Warning Growl to them, which is especially useful for Cooper or any of the other gunmen. It can also enable a combo we'll get to later. Mark Territory removes all nearby ski markers just like Artemis's bonus action, but gives focus to Ulur instead of distracted to enemies. Ulur can remove markers up to 18 inches from the model he teleports to if you maximize all distances, which combines with Artemis's 18-inch movement range to practically cover the whole board. Flush Them Out is a support action, providing a little bit of movement and focused 1 for Cooper or another Apex damage dealer. The push direction is restricted, but by utilizing other options and with good play, this shouldn't cause many problems. Ulur can perform repositioning tricks like first pushing an ally into engagement, then walking and using I've Got Your Back to pull them back out and safely in Warning Growl range. That actually doesn't seem very niche. Consider how often there's an enemy within 4 or 5 inches of any particular model. Finally, we have Trapping Jaws. The damage track is bad, but the attack isn't made for damage. It's designed to be accurate, apply staggered, and enable 1 of 3 excellent triggers. The built-in RAM heals Ulur in a way making the damage track equivalent to 3-4-5. A 1-to-1 comparison of damage and healing isn't perfectly applicable in Malifaux, but I think it's accurate enough. Alternatively, You're Comin' With Me is niche, but can help gunmen out of engagement, reposition Warning Growl, throw an enemy into a pit trap, or trigger Cripsis attacks. The best trigger, however, by far, is Hold Down. Any free attack is good, but the obvious standout in Apex is Lord Cooper's massive rifle. With this trigger, Ulur can pull off several variations of a particular combo. Picture this. Ulur and Cooper are left to activate. Cooper is engaged and doesn't have line of sight to the enemies engaged by Malifaux. If he activates right now, he can't do much, so Ulur activates first. He teleports within 2 inches of Malifaux, uses I've Got Your Back to pull Cooper out of engagement, uses Flush Them Out on Cooper to give him focus +1 and position him, and then charges an enemy engaged by the Malifaux, triggering Hold Down. Cooper is now out of engagement, ready to activate, and gets a free attack with double positive to damage. That's 7 damage right there, and probably a dead enemy. Hold Down isn't even once per activation, although in this case Cooper's gun is. Final verdict? In keyword 5 stars. If I could rate this 6 stars, I would. Let's list all the features Apex synergizes with best and see which are provided by Ulur. Generating attacks out of activation, especially Master Gun attacks, check. Generating focus for others, check. Movement effects that help gun attacks get into range, check. Movement effects that get Cooper out of engagement, check. Mobility and faraway scheming to balance out Apex's gun line, check. Bulky defenses or protection for nearby allies, well, you get the idea. Out of keyword, 3 stars. Out of keyword, Ulur costs 7 stones, loses by your side, and Flush Them Out becomes much worse. This surprisingly still leaves him with a somewhat decent protector kit, but unfortunately explorers already have some of the best protectors in the game. However, the exception is taking Ulur in a package with Model 9 or Malifaux, something you're now hearing for the 3rd time if you've been watching this review in order. Ulur can now buy your side and Flush Them Out, and he can still act as a protector to lessen the need to take the emissary. In pools where you can double up on symbols of authority, breakthrough, and sabotage, or at least schemes like them, it might be one of the best options in the whole faction. Expensive, but strong. Cripsis Core, 7 cost minion. The Cripsis Core is Explorer's sniper minion, similar to Rami, Hans, or Katanaka, but with a twist. Rather than shooting directly, the Cripsis prefers to set up an overwatch and fire on reaction when enemies expose themselves. Cripsis attacks normally ignore friendly fire and cover, but not concealment, and come at stat 5. The damage track is bad, but that's fixed by the free suit. Note that any condition gives a suit, including the enemy's own focused or shielded. The Crypsis can build in a ram for 3/4/5, a mask to give staggered, or a crow for adversary. Remember you can double crit strike, so when building in a ram, consider that the attack still has a crit strike trigger. The built-in trigger mechanic makes Crypsis incredible at using both sides of Predatory Instinct, the damage bonus for huge focused hits and the dual bonus for threatening a condition or 3 minimum damage. Patient Strike is the Crypsis' biggest threat though, if used properly. It drops a strike marker up to 24 inches away since it's a gun action that can benefit from Sniper, and it lasts until the Crypsis moves or end of turn. If an enemy crosses the Crypsis sight along that line to the marker, the Crypsis gets to attack it, ignoring range and line of sight once per activation. That means it ignores concealing terrain, doesn't need to activate Sniper, and can benefit from Predatory Instinct on every shot. If that wasn't enough board impact, the Crypsis can also remove ski markers with target practice. Just be aware he only gets 2 AP and wants to concentrate, shoot, Patient Strike, and target practice. The Tome trigger on Patient Strike helps keep him loaded for the next turn, but he also wants to spend focused on attacks and absolutely doesn't want to move. He wants a perfect spot, not only where he can see enemies, the best movement paths, and scheme scoring zones, but also one hopefully within 3 inches of concealing, severe, and hazardous terrain. Beneath the Leaves copies these effects and radiates them for enemies in a 3-inch aura. The two most important ones are Concealing and Hazardous for deterring ranged and melee attacking respectively, but Severe is still good. If these effects don't already exist on the board, your options are generally Pit Traps or Geodes for Hazardous, Web Markers or Dust Clouds for Severe, and Umbra Models, Shadow Markers, Lamp Markers, Dust Clouds, or Symbols of Authority strategy markers for concealment. Remember to place destructible terrain behind the Crypsis to make it a little harder to remove if a model charges in. And don't worry too much about collecting all the effects. They're certainly a benefit, but not 100% necessary. To round out the Crypsis' amazing kit, he has great defenses. 7 health means he won't get one shot, 6 willpower is great, and despite having only 4 defense, the combination of Beneath the Leaves and Stealth protects him at both long and short range. As long as his crew supports him, he's mostly only vulnerable to getting charged, but even then he'll make the enemy pay with hazardous terrain damage. The Crypsis' weaknesses, try saying that 3 times fast, are not having an engagement range, mobility, or a real bonus action. Quick Retreat is fine, but it's not proactive and leaves him effectively slow unless he's engaged. His effectiveness comes from getting good shots, board control, and removing enemy scheme markers to make up for not having that third action or movement. Final verdict? In keyword, 3 stars. The Crypsis is great at what he does, in particular when the board already has some hazardous terrain and forests for him to copy, especially if he can stand on a climbable terrain piece nearby for line of sight. Just have push support ready to keep the strike lines clear or generate more attacks, and you'll be fine. Out of keyword, 3 stars. The Crypsis is almost completely independent and can tag along nearly any crew. On the right boards, he can be taken just for the damage and area control, but he really shines as a defensive option against ski markers or in Vendetta. He's less likely to be found in crews which create concealing terrain though, as he does suffer from that on regular attacks. Harpooner, 7 cost minion. This is just a quick note on the Harpooner, who was covered in the EVS video. She brings several things to Apex, namely a good outlet for low cards in hand, some blast which gives staggered, and the ability to move markers, as well as a ranged push attack. Her best feature is her bonus action and the compressed nets trigger, but unfortunately, in keyword, 1 star. Even in cases where her actions are impactful, she suffers from being squishy and an oversaturated gunman role. The willpower weakness isn't overcome with speed like Ulur's is, and that's only made worse by opponents hiring an Obey against Malosaurus. Ulur's Warning Ground fixes the fragility, but that aura is already spread thin between Artemis, Cooper, and others which desire it. The push effect on Harpoon Gun is decent for exploiting Crypsis and Pit Traps, but taking a Harpooner on top of a Crypsis, Vagati, and Cooper is just way too much investment into relatively static gunman models. The area control on Vagati is better with comparable shooting and card draw, The shooting and survivability on Crypsis is much better, and in matchups where you need marker manipulation, I can't imagine not picking Tannenbaum or Sandworm over Harpooner's single direction short push. Even if the opposing crew targets defense exclusively, Crypsis or out of keyword choices are going to do better. She can make a good hopeful prospect replacement, but that's about it. Vagati Huntsman, 6-cost minion. The Vagati is Apex's third and last gunman type minion. His lack of triggers and ways to ignore shooting penalties means he doesn't shoot as well as the Crypsis or even the Harpooner who can attack in close combat. His very basic melee and shooting attacks are not bad with Predatory Instinct, but definitely not what he's made for. Instead, his role is board control and synergy through dropping pit trap markers. Unlike most pit trap creators, the Vagati can create 2 traps a turn, one at short range which can be upgraded to medium range with a tome, and one at long range which requires a crow or the Malifaux aura. The latter one is specifically dropped in base contact, meaning it'll always affect the target but can be easily removed. It's best to hit expensive engaged enemies which will have to suffer the hazardous or effectively be slow from having to remove the marker. Pit traps can be devastating on some boards by blocking walkways, and they perfectly complement Crypsis core through providing hazardous and severe terrain to their aura. With these 2 models in the crew, Apex can really double down on pushing enemies as a way to generate damage. On turn 1, the Vagati can drop a trap in the middle of the board by shooting a runaway and doesn't kill it with a weak 2+1 for hazardous. His second trap either gets a tome and also sets up near the center, or otherwise can be placed next to your Crypsis core for later. The Vagati will usually draw a card when he activates and force a discard once per turn with Setup the Kill. In theory, this ability could generate an attack from Cooper or Malifaux, but a good opponent will never allow it, so just think of it as a discard. The Vagati also has one of the most unique attacks in the game in On the Hunt. I try to remember the effects like this. Beasts get pushed 4 inches because he wants to push Apex beasts for free. Against enemies, this can sometimes deny schemes or charges at long range. Constructs often have armor, so they take 2 irreducible damage. Against those, you can consider this a weak 3 or 4 damage attack, which also ignores soulstones and shielded. Cooper enjoys hunting people, so living models get adversary for accuracy. This is probably the weakest effect since the crew already creates adversary so easily. And finally, undead get injured too because hunters skin what they kill. The injured +2 is my favorite effect, basically marking an enemy for death. On the Hunt really shines most against models with 2 characteristics, especially against living constructs which are everywhere, and undead constructs found in Rezzers and Amalgam. Other combinations are definitely more rare. The downside is, unfortunately, the Vagati comes with a massive flaw. He's extremely squishy with only 6 wounds and average defensive stats. Fortunately, Apex can keep Ulur nearby, which also satisfies the Bond of Blood requirement. After the first turn or 2, the Vagati's traps are more or less deployed, and it's less of a big deal if he dies, so Ulur can teleport away to scheme. It also helps that the Vagati is 6 cost, only giving 1 bounty token in public enemies and being an easy sacrifice in Hidden Martyrs. We'll see if similar schemes exist in Gaining Grounds too. Final verdict? In keyword, 3 stars. The Vagati is amazing for blocking paths on some boards and synergizing with Crypsis core. He's a strong part of Apex's board control game and comes with some decent support abilities and attacks. Apex is best brought out for exactly the kind of boards he and the Crypsis thrive on. Ones with mostly blocking terrain rather than concealing, and clear corridors that forces models to move through traps and firing lines. He could be extremely squishy, but he really only needs to drop his traps and then die, and if there's a scheme like Hidden Martyrs in the pool, it's not a bad choice. Out of keyword, 1 star. The Vagati costs 7 and loses a lot out of keyword. Free crows from Malifaux, Crypsis synergy, Allure protection, and his abilities that reference Apex models. If traps are insanely good on your board though, all that might not matter at the end of the day, but I don't see this being a common pick. Most other Explorers crews have their own version of severe, impassable, or hazardous terrain, and Archivist is always a better standalone choice, even if his webs aren't hazardous. Out of keyword choices. As always, remember that these are just a few select picks with some key synergies, and not an exhaustive list. Now, you all know that I really like this one because I keep mentioning it. What can I say? I really like the investment type options in this game. The Hopeful Prospect I actually consider almost to be like an unofficial Apex minion. It just fits so well. First and foremost, he's able to give Cooper focus in the middle of his activation. Cooper will absolutely be landing kills, and it's a necessity for him to handle his focused condition properly. So every time he lands a kill within 4 inches of one of these, he either immediately gets a focused for his reload shot, or if on the reload shot, he gets a focused for next turn. The prospect also has condition removal, which is something that Apex lacks, and he's able to heal, at least when he has a ram. Apex has very little healing outside of Cooper's one bonus action. They also have an interesting interaction with the way that runaways work, because if you dump your entire hand, the hopeful no longer has to discard a card but still draws for free. So if Apex manage to empty their hand, then they can activate one, or if they take two, both of their hopefuls one after the other to draw cards, and finally then activate a runaway to escape and refill their entire hand. Maybe that activation order won't be as easy to manage as I make it seem, but it's an option. Lastly, it makes sense both story-wise and gameplay-wise for Cooper to bring hopeful prospects to prove themselves, at least more than prospects landing a kill for Ivan and immediately disintegrating into a shadow creature. The Apex minions all seem to be tailored towards countering different things, but usually not as well as other hiring options. If the hopeful prospect lands a kill in the middle of a game, you can tailor him exactly to what you need in that situation. The Crypsis is best at long range, has high willpower, and can remove scheme markers to deny points. The Harpooner is good at melee range, has higher defense, and can move markers and models to deny points. And lastly, the Vagati lies somewhere in the middle on defenses, having average stats but provides card advantage, pit traps, and the unique effects of On the Hunt. Next, we have the Intrepid Effigy. Not the Emissary this time, specifically the Effigy. Apex can get away with not using the Emissary specifically because Ulur already has that defensive kit. Even if Assassinate is in the pool, you can pretty much survive just on Ulur alone until turn 3 when the Effigy will become the Emissary. Artemis already has Intimidating Roar, and the Effigy can even give focus to Cooper if he hits something with a mask, including a friendly. Next we have Bibe and Calypso in the event that you're taking that hyper-defensive, pit trap, area control gunline build. Calypso can push enemies in an AoE and have them all trigger hazardous terrain and sightlines from Crypsis. What they do already overlaps with Malosaurus a little bit, but I think Bibe and Calypso can push models much more consistently. And for my last pick, we have Gravegoo. Gravegoo is very good at removing enemy threats, he makes terrain on the board hazardous, and he's just overall tanky and difficult to take down. There's enough staggered in the crew to synergize with him, and he can be pushed by Artemis and given focus by Cooper's bonus action on first turn to go and quickly swallow someone and hit him for 6 damage, hopefully. Counterplay. Apex almost exclusively targets defense, so try to take models with higher defense stats. 6 defense, or if possible 7, is an important benchmark to not get hit by Cooper. Another important benchmark is being able to survive a 7 damage shot. Usually being able to survive 6 damage is enough, but not against Cooper. You can't rely on Demise, and you can't rely on Hard to Wound alone, but if you combine Hard to Wound and a Stone defensively, or Hard to Wound and Concealment and Friendly Fire, or perhaps Condition Removal to remove Adversary, you may be able to make your models immune to Cooper's straight damage flips. Engage Lord Cooper, especially if you can stagger him, or just kill him if possible. Finally, just like in every dog movie ever made, you gotta kill the dogs. Artemis and Ulur are definitely the scheming linchpins of the crew, especially Ulur. And that's Apex. As always, you should see a summary of the ratings on screen now. I think this Explorer's keyword surprised me the most in terms of how fun it is to play, especially without my favorite mechanic, summoning. There's much more depth and customization available than it initially lets on, and the hounds are especially fun pieces. There's just so many crazy things they can do during their activations. Leave a comment about your own thoughts, and I look forward to seeing you back soon for my FAQ, errata, and Gaining Grounds 2 reviews. Have a good one.
お前はもう死んでいる。何？もうあたくびできれば